So our 4-month um, 4-month-long season of austerity ends tomorrow. And so, as we've mentioned before, it's quite common that religions will designate a certain time of year for austerities, for introspection, for special worship. Immediately Ramadan in Islam, where they fast from sunrise to sunset for about a month, comes to mind. And it's a pretty, Orthodox Muslims, they fast from water too. So there's no water from sunrise to sunset. And if you're in a place like the Middle East where it gets scorchingly hot and it's during the summer months, it's like a May, June thing. So especially given it's during the summer months and it's a religion that was formed in the Middle East and it's a fast from water as well as food, it's no joke. Athletes, observant, and let's see the 5 pillars of Islam. You got to give charity, do the Hajj and go to Mecca, pray 5 times a day, do Ramadan, and I think there's like a vow as well, the 5 pillars of Islam. Charity, Hajj, so Zakat, Hajj. Yeah, you have to confess your faith, pray 5 times a day while facing Mecca, go to Mecca, do Ramadan, and then also give charity. So it's one of the 5 pillars. You know who's following it because so many athletes can't compete during that time of year because they're following it, and so they can't train properly and they can't compete. So it's relatively common. We don't do this so much here in the States or maybe in California, but there's also Lent, which is the 40 days leading up to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, which is a time of penance for Christendom, especially Catholics and Orthodox. My priest growing up would be vegetarian and sober. He normally wasn't vegetarian and sober, but for Lent, he'd be vegetarian and sober as well. He even gave up dairy during Lent as well. So it's this sort of season of austerity, religious season thing is quite universal. And it makes sense. There were, just like we have, largely our life revolves around the diurnal rhythm of day and night, and especially in an agrarian society, life revolves around the moon cycle. And for everyone, everywhere in the world, life revolves around the seasons that occur as the earth travels around the sun. And so if you're in a place like Singapore, you have a wet season and a dry season. But in that wet season, it changes your life. You don't go out as much, and in the dry season, it's more favorable for activities and such, outdoor activities and such. And in the U.S., it gets dark really early. It'll end up getting dark like around 4:15 or 4:30, and then in the summertime, it's not getting dark till 9. It's a huge difference in how you live during those evening hours. Plus, it gets cold and inhospitable, so people start spending a lot of time indoors. People get sick because they're indoors all the time, breathing each other's air, more so than in the summertime. There's rain, there's snow, crops die. The turning of the leaves, people go out to see the turning of the leaves. People go out on vacation and go skiing. We find a way to sort of ride the wave, so to speak. And so in the wintertime, people play winter sports, and they make it fun, or they make snowmen. But it doesn't change the reality that your life has to be adjusted because of the season. So then if you take God really seriously in your life, it would make sense that you would also have, in addition to us having a small season as we spin around, and day and night related to the sun, which is giving light or not giving light, depending on where we're turned. And then, so you got that. And then you've got the moon cycle, which again is reflecting sunlight, but it's affecting crops tremendously and your ability to see at night in a non-light pollution situation. And then you've got the seasons of the year as we're going around the sun, and spring, summer, winter, fall, or the extra 2 seasons as they're conceived of in India, or just 2 seasons, the dry and the wet season, depending on where you are in the world. If you're more equatorial, it's going to be like that. But all of it's related to the sun, which is just such a big deal. The sun is such a big deal. The water cycle is dependent on the sun. The carbon dioxide oxygen exchange cycle is dependent on the sun. The heat of our planet, our atmosphere, it's all dependent on the sun, and us having a certain amount of access to the sun, but not so much. The sun's a certain size, but not too big. We're a certain distance close enough, but not quite too close, so that life all of a sudden becomes inhospitable. And we're spinning, so it's not just that you're in the sun all the time, which would also be problematic. You need these circadian rhythms so you can recharge and regenerate and rest. Things get a break. When it's sunny all the time, it gets to be problematic, and especially when it's night all the time. People start to get depressed and kill themselves. You got to go for light therapy if you live in a place where there's no sunlight. Some places in the world, you get 1-2 hours a day of sunlight in the wintertime, and it gets difficult. I mean, we produce vitamin D as a result of being in the sun. Your body can produce vitamin D from other nutrients and minerals, provided you get access to sunlight, which is amazing. It's the only vitamin that's produced by your own body as a result of our own version of photosynthesis. So, whether it's day, night, or the moon, the lunar cycle, or the seasons, it's all linked to the sun. As is photosynthesis, the carbon dioxide, oxygen exchange, our atmosphere, the water cycle, all the things we're dependent on are linked to the sun. And so for people who believe in God, God is like the sun. He's this central element in your life, this singularity, and your life revolves around that. Much like we revolve around the sun, for religious-minded people, God becomes another sun, a greater sun, another cynosphere, another natural center, another singularity that all life revolves around. And as such, you end up with religious seasons. If you go to a Catholic church, they have religious seasons around the life of Christ, and they have different colors that the priests wear with their vestments, different ways they decorate the church, different rituals they do on the altar. And they've taken this idea of seasons and they've, made it religious, religiousized it. Because that's what you do when something's really important to you. You start to make it indispensable in your life. You start, like for people where the ocean is indispensable for their life, they're going to live near the ocean. They're going to go in the water regularly. Or people who are really into hiking, they're going to move somewhere where they can hike on a regular basis. Or when someone's really important, then you marry them, or you partner with them, or you start a business with them, or they become your inner circle of friends, and you spend holidays with them, and you make it so that your life and their life largely overlap, and the trajectories of your lives largely overlap. You vacation with people when you're close to them. And that way you demonstrate practically that these people are important, these people are indispensable, and I'm going to craft my life with them in mind. We all do this. We all do this. A lot of times parents, their whole weekend is centers around their children's extracurricular activities. Every weekend, is spent shuttling the kids from point A to point B and back again, so that, whether it's soccer or wrestling or whatever the kids are doing, dance, whatever they're doing, it's like this huge, sometimes like wrestling, it's like you wonder who can do this sport where your entire year is spent flying to different places so your kids can wrestle in tournaments and driving. And it's like it becomes almost like a second job. You're putting in like 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week into it. When I was a kid, I played basketball and baseball and football and soccer and did Boy Scouts. Cub Scouts first, then Boy Scouts. Indian Guides, then Cub Scouts, then Boy Scouts. And so my parents, practically speaking, 5 days a week after school had to take me somewhere, and then always on Saturday and Sunday there were other activities, and there were 3 of us. It's far out. I think this stuff was designed when, mainly the father was the breadwinner, and then the mom could be a stay-at-home mom. So it was almost like she needed extra stuff to do. So they came up with this whole world of stuff. But then women went into the workplace, and you started to have both people earning a salary to support a family, and then they forgot to take out those extracurricular activities, and it's almost like a mud run or some kind of Spartan race raising kids nowadays in terms of the stuff you have to do. It's like a constant scrum. A scrum is that battle when the 2 rugby teams go head to head and all the members fight with each other. It's called a scrum. They try to move the ball a few inches. It's incredibly difficult. So raising kids is kind of like that now. Anyway, for religious people, then God is like a sun, S-U-N. And God is like your family. Not an abstract concept that maybe you dabble in from time to time when the mood strikes you. Not like that. But a real part of your life. People say grace before every meal. Catholics, it's very common for Catholics, especially women, especially older women, to go to church every single day, 7 days a week. Go to confession every single day. Go to Mass every single day, sometimes twice a day on the weekends. That's not unusual, like a strong Catholic society. And if you go down across the border of Mexico, like an old world place, then the women are there at the church all day long, making garlands for the statues and cleaning the grounds and cooking food for the priests, maybe just dropping by with some sweets for the priests and just hanging out. That's where they go, and then hitting a couple of masses a day and just kind of spending their whole lives attached to their local church. In fact, if you look at the way the U.S. was, where we have our temple in Long Beach, but even here in Laguna Beach, there's just, you wonder, what are all these church buildings doing here? Because they're not that full. But it's because there was a time where every denomination in every neighborhood had to get a building together. And so as soon as people made some money, they would build a church, and then they would spend their whole life going there. And that was their after-school activity, and that was what they did. And they went there every day, every couple of days. And how do you know that? Because you see all the churches everywhere. And people, there was something going on then. If you look at the old world, it's still going on. Here, things have become more secularized, so it's just on Sundays now, and for an ever-dwindling percentage of the U.S. population. But there's a logic to it. These things are important to people, and so they govern their lives around them. Because what's important to you, you then incorporate into your life. And the more important it is, the more fundamental you incorporate into your life. And so people get married and have friendships that last forever. See their friends every day. Talk to their friends on the phone every day. Travel across the country to see extended family, their cousins or uncles or whatever, multiple times a year. Great expense. Your summer is planned around family getting together from all over the country and having a family reunion. It might last a week or two. That's your big summer vacation. Or people watch sports like it's their religion. You know, cricket is real popular in India. Kind of a spastic baseball game. But it's like all my Indian friends wake up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to watch cricket in real time. Like a serious cricket fan, they watch the event when they can't bear to wake up and hear about the event, so they'll wake up, right? At ridiculous times in the nighttime. You know people like this, right?
My dad was like that.
Yeah. And so religious people really value God as part of their life. And theologically, they believe that God is actually the center of the universe. And so it's not just that, you know, like KD, that's KD, he's important to me, so we hang out. I've made the decision. I like KD. I like his cool, bright blue sweatshirt, whatever color that is. Teal, kind of fire teal, whatever that is. Like a whatever that color is. Marine, aquamarine, I guess. And so then KD and I are tight. We talk every day. I choose. So there's that principle is there with God. That also works. But then there's also the idea that God is the actual center of the universe, the source of all life, the ultimate sun that everything revolves around, the son of suns, the origin of everything. And so there's also a logic that it's not just that I've chosen God, but the reality is that God is the center of everything. And so I'm not just choosing, I'm also simply seeing what is. Seeing reality for what it is. Did you guys follow that? It's an extra feature. It's an extra feature. Well, that's my dad, or that's my mom, or that's my kids. Sure, but God would be the parent of everyone, the most beloved of everyone, the beginning, middle, and end of all things, the origin of all things, what everything has in common, the substratum of all reality. And so in addition to the idea, I chose this is my choice, I chose to watch soccer religiously, there's also the idea that I chose reality. I'm seeing reality. Like the law of gravity isn't just a reality people choose. It's a force that you cannot get around that affects everything. And if you ignore it, you're ignoring reality. And if you see it, you're simply seeing what is independent of your acceptance or non-acceptance. Gravity exists and you are subjected to it. Entropy exists. Old age exists. Things decay. To see these things isn't just to choose them, it's to see what actually is, what is real, to contend with reality on its own terms, which is objectively true, independent of your whims or thoughts or feelings. And the idea of God also participates in that. And for religious-minded people, it's as fundamental to the universe as gravity, even more so. As such, religious people gear their year around God. We do the same thing. We got 4 months. It starts with the rainy season, where traditional Hindu monks would sit in one place and perform austerities. Austerities means you give certain things up and you do certain things. So you maybe chant extra japa, you pray, do extra prayers, and then you also, let's say, give up eating, spinach, for example. Or you give up, you just eat 1 meal a day. Or you bathe with only cold water. There's all sorts of different austerities people perform. So things you give up, and then extra things you do, negative things you give up, and positive things you do. And we do that for 4 months. And of those 4 months, one of them is especially sacred. That's the month we're in now, and we're on the last day of that month. Tomorrow will be Purnima. I'll shave my head and my face on Purnima. I haven't shaved this month, so I'll shave my head and my face on Purnima, and then the month will be over. And then we start the next month. There's another vow that goes along with that one. It's called Katyaya Nibrat, where you pray for Krishna to be your spouse. But we're at the last day, or second to last day, of the most important month of the 4 months of our religious season. And the month is called the month of Kartik, which is based on Kritika, which is a constellation in the sky. But it's also called the month of Damodar. All of our names, all our months are given names of Krishna. So this month is called the month of Damodar. And it celebrates Krishna, who's known as Damodar. Damodar is a compound word made up of 2 other words. Dhamma. Dhamma means to control. And Udara. Udara means abdomen. And it's where you get the English word udder from. It's where you get the word udder from. So Damodar means Dhamma Udara, the person who is bound around their belly. It's a name for Krishna. And we have 2 types of names of Krishna. We have Mukhya Nam and Gona Nam. The indirect names of Krishna are names like Vishnu, which means the all-pervasive one. Or Ishwar, which means the controller. Or Brahman, which means the great one. Those names, for us, are indirect names of God. The names which we consider to be primary and direct are intimate names for God of angels who have an intimate, loving relationship with Krishna, and which tell you something about Krishna's wonderful personality and activities. And not vague stuff, but very specific stuff. So Damodar is a favored name of Krishna. It's like whenever I meet someone named Damodar, I always feel like a warmth in my heart. It's a beautiful name. You picked some good names for your kids. Keshav, Madhav, right? Madhav and Keshav. These are just traditional Vaishnav names. When you hear these names, you feel happy. Keshav, Madhav, Damodar, Krishna, Govind. They're just kind of normal, beautiful names of Krishna that are almost like comfort food, where when you hear them, you feel a little joy in your heart. They're names which have been beloved for thousands of years by our tradition. So Damodar is one such name. And the name Damodar is related to a Lila. Lila, for us, might be rendered in English as sacred narration. And Lila is a peculiar feature of our religion, Hinduism in general. It's a peculiar feature of Hinduism. It's there to some extent in all religions, but we really celebrate it and dive into it. Lila is the idea that God comes into this world at regular intervals and performs miraculous activities which are seen by faithful saintly people and recorded for posterity's sake, and they give you a glimpse into heaven of what could be in eternity. What God looks like, how you can love God, the activities of heaven. And if they weren't sometimes miraculously performed in this world, no one would ever know about them. And so Krishna has to use his omnipotence to come into this world to perform such activities so that we'll have an idea of what's possible. It's inspirational. It's like a teaser trailer to the spiritual world, to heaven, to what could be. Amazingly, Lila makes perfect sense. Wouldn't all good God want to whet our appetite without compromising our free will? Of course. Wouldn't all powerful God be able to do so? Yes. Wouldn't all good God want to come into this world where we exist in mortal frames and show us a glimpse of what's possible? Yes. Could an all-powerful God do that? Absolutely they could. There's no reason why an all-powerful being could not appear in this world. And we don't say we're the only religion that has Lilas. Other religions are welcome to have them too. But it's as opposed to like a burning bush or a voice from heaven, which are more like omens for us. We have full-fledged stories, and they're sacred for us. And so the one that this month is named after is the Damodar Lila, the Lila of Damodar, where Krishna got bound with a belly around his rope. So let's just dive into it real quick. Here we go. We're going to speed up now. Krishna comes into this world as a beautiful child. Why? Because that allows for his angels to love him without asking for anything. If you think of God as your mother or your father, imprinted in your mind is always the idea of they gave me this, they gave me that, and therefore I have to show appreciation. Therefore your love is not causeless, it's caused, it's reciprocal, but God stepped first and you're stepping second. And that's the reality. But that kind of love is always reactionary, and it's not quite as sincere as just spontaneous love, where you love somebody just because, independent of anything they do for you. Rich people oftentimes will hang out with the same people they grew up with before they became rich and famous, because those people they know love them for who they actually are and not for their reputation. This is like this happens. I'm thinking of like some actors in particular, but they essentially import their whole crew of people they grew up with, move them all to Hollywood with them, buy them all houses, and give them all jobs just so they can be surrounded by people that they know actually care about them. So that makes sense that you aspire for people who love you just because. And it makes perfect sense that God would also have such a feeling. In fact, a deity that wasn't desirous of love would be a robotic deity. And so an all-good deity would obviously have to be capable of love, and love necessitates vulnerability. Sometimes people see vulnerability as weakness. That's actually not true. Vulnerability means, in this context, that you're affected by others, and there's no possibility of really loving somebody deeply and not being affected by them, and therefore a deity which was completely independent of us would not be the highest conception of divinity. The highest conception of divinity would be a deity who was transcendental and also capable of love, and therefore also capable of vulnerability, and therefore also desirous of intimacy. And in fact, Krishna is our tradition's attempt to postulate just such a deity, just such a rich conception of divinity, without compromising the transcendence aspect. So you got to have all the intimate, vulnerable, lovable, loving stuff without them becoming compromised and materialized by that, and still maintaining transcendence and holding those two ideas in tension with one another. And that's Krishna, the transcendental Cupid. And so Krishna appears in this world as a child to accept love unlimitedly. And Krishna has angels who come from him, but who think he's their child. They're possessed of motherly and fatherly affection towards Krishna, and they're just always thinking of Krishna the way a parent thinks of their child without ever expecting anything. You think about the love of a parent for the child. You change their diaper, you clean up their stool, they vomit. I've had my kids pass stool on me and then vomit on me while I'm patting them on the back and caring for them. Like I'm changing their diaper and then they go again. And then you're trying to deal with that and then they yak on you. And then you're still like patting them on the back and saying, it's okay, good job, and wiping their bum because they're like 6 months old or a year old. And so you're wiping their bum and cleaning up the spit. Who do you do that for? Who would you do that for? Who would vomit on you and defecate on you, and then you would pat them on the back and tell them good job? So Thinking of God as your child opens up amazing doors in terms of selfless love. And so we think of Krishna as a child. And we think of, and so the story continues. So Krishna appears in this world as a child with a mother. And his mother's name is Yashoda. And Yashoda, in these heavenly pastimes that are displayed in this planet for the benefit of us, so we have a sense of what's possible in transcendence, in an intimate love with divinity. Yashoda, playing her part, she takes care of Krishna just like her child. And they live in a rural environment because obviously heaven would be pastoral. It wouldn't be urban. I can argue for that, but I'm just going to say it so we can move forward quickly. You can actually make an argument for that. It's not an unreasonable point to make. It's not an arbitrary point. Heaven would be natural and pastoral because that's the earth the way God created it, as opposed to urban, which is the way we created the world. You follow that? You can actually make an argument for it. And Krishna lives in a symbiotic, mutualistic relationship with his surrounding environment. So Krishna takes care of cows, because cows are these wonderful animals that just give way more milk than their calves can drink. We bizarrely produce lactase into adulthood so we can digest lactose, milk sugar, which other animals can't do, but we can do that because we produce lactase all the way through our entire life, which is just crazy. And so Krishna lives in this vegetarian, symbiotic world. And in fact, amazingly, the Bible postulates just such a world as well. The Hebrew Bible, the book of Isaiah, says the lion and the lamb shall lay down together, and the snake will eat dust, and no one will hurt or destroy one another on all my holy mountain. It's actually a statement from the Hebrew Bible about what heaven will look like. And so this world where people aren't hurting each other, and man and nature live in symbiosis with one another, benefiting one another instead of harming one another. And so Krishna lives in such an environment, a symbiotic, rural, pastoral culture, like what was normative in the world for thousands of years, up until we industrialized everything and began living in opposition to the environment. And so Yashoda in the morning time is taking care of the house and feeding her child. And so at one point, she was feeding Krishna, and the milk on the stove was boiling over. Now, amazingly, our theologians spend a lot of time thinking about what it would be like to live in a world where everything was conscious, but you could still do things. And so they've come up with stuff like, when Yashoda's cooking rice for Krishna, she asks the rice, "Are you done cooking?" And the rice will respond and say yes, or give us a few more minutes to cook. And so you have to conceive of a world where everything is conscious, where every atom is conscious. And yet at the same time, things can still happen. I can't say anything logically incongruent with that idea. It's totally mind-blowing. But it seems perfectly congruent with the idea of conceiving that God would exist in a spiritual world, therefore a world of consciousness, therefore every atom was conscious. And the grass and the trees can have arguments. You're the best devotee because Krishna's always touching you with his lotus feet. No, you're the best devotees because you're taking such great care to create these nice bowers to shelter Krishna. And the grass and the trees can have arguments where they glorify one another for their devotion. And Mother Yashoda can talk to the rice. It's actually a logical, coherent world. It's just mind-blowing to stretch your mind to try to think of it. So anyway, Krishna's there, and Mother Yashoda has to get up and tend to a pot of milk which is boiling over on the stove. So she puts Krishna down and ignores him and neglects him, and goes and runs off to tend to the milk, which is a really important thing for our tradition, because they make the point that Yashoda's service was anukul. It was favorable for Krishna because even though she neglected Krishna, she was ultimately trying to do something for Krishna's benefit. And so even though she put Krishna down, what she did is still favorable. Whereas Putana, the witch who tried to poison Krishna, even though she was feeding Krishna, the opposite of what Yashoda did. Yashoda stopped feeding Krishna from her breast. That's another mind blower. You can feed Krishna from your breast. You can feed God. You can feed God with like your breast milk. That's just like Thomas Aquinas one time said. He was the father of Catholic theology, the most important Catholic theologian in the history of the Catholic Church, 11th century. Thomas Aquinas said you can kiss the feet of God, you can kiss the hand of God, you can kiss the lips of God. And he said, I don't understand that. I know it's true, but I'm focused on the feet. He had some sense that there would have to be, if you love God, someone would have to be that loved God intimately and kiss God on the lips. It's just too wild of a concept for him. So he had to stick to the feet like a servant, but he at least acknowledged that such a thing would have to exist. Even nuns had this idea that they're marrying Jesus. That's why they won't take a husband in this world. It's a very romantic idea that I'm for Jesus, I'm not for any man of this world. Therefore, I'm not going to have sex with any mortal in this world because I'm for Jesus. I'm Jesus' wife. I'm Jesus' spouse. It's a beautiful idea. Monks feel the same way. And so Yashoda was feeding Krishna. She put him down and neglected him, but that's considered bhakti. But then Putana, who fed Krishna poison, that's not considered bhakti. Because it's not just what you do, it's also why you do it. And so our theologians really like to invoke Yashoda as being this symbol of what it means to think of bhakti properly. Your mentality and your activities are both considered, not just your activities, not just your mentality. It has to be synergistic. Both things have to come into unison with one another. And then Krishna got angry. And Krishna, she was churning butter in an old school way where you have like a big mortar and pestle. You have a bucket and you have a big rod in the bucket and you churn the rod like this and the yogurt agitates. And the yogurt has acidophilus and other probiotic cultures in it. And then you turn it into butter and the yogurt separates into whey and curd, but the curd it separates into the milk fat and then the other ingredients, which is the protein and the carbohydrates. They separate. So the whey has the protein and carbohydrates, and then the butter has just the fat. And they have this vegan butter called Miyoko. Have you guys ever had it? It's a cultured vegan butter. And you can taste the kind of tanginess of the culture. That's because when you do a cultured dairy product and you make it into butter, it tastes different. It tastes fundamentally different. So she was making this old school butter from yogurt. Krishna took that and he broke that pot. And then he tracked little footprints as he ran away from home. He did some other stuff. He went into a storeroom and broke a pot where they had some dairy products, and they all fell down. And then he fed the monkeys and the other animals, and then he tried to escape again. And then his mother followed him and ran up behind him and captured him. And our theologians love this one too. Because what's happening here? Krishna, who moves faster than the speed of the mind, who cannot be touched or seen or possessed by anyone, is capturable by love. And so because Yashoda loved him, she was able to capture him. And then she punished him. Another mind-blowing concept, punishing God. But you can imagine if you were possessed of pure love, you would think, I have to care for Krishna. Krishna's dependent on me. When you really love somebody, you can't think that they're above you so far that they don't need you. Otherwise, you can't really feel love for them. You can only feel awe or veneration for them. But love depends on equality. That's why we can't fall in love with stars or dolphins. You have to be some equality. It can't be too big or too small. It has to be kind of at your level. This, of course, is why we must have a theomorphic form. We must have been created in the image of God because we're the only species that has the ability to think about and fall in love with Krishna. Therefore, Krishna would have had to make us enough like him that we could fall in love with him. Because an all-good God would want for that possibility to exist, and all powerful God could make that exist. And so based on these simple ideas that most people accept about the nature of God, you can even get this idea that we must be theomorphic. That Krishna must have pastimes. That Krishna must become a child. That Krishna's Lilas must be visible in this world. And so then Yashoda caught Krishna, and a deity which could not be caught by love is not a deity worth worshipping. We celebrate that Krishna is prem vashya. He's controlled by love. Another trope that our philosophers and our theologians love. That Krishna is controllable by love. A deity that was not controllable by love would not be all good. And you just have to use every bit of your intelligence to think through what a supremely relative and supremely absolute deity would look like. We tend to do this thing which is called the principle of invidious contrast, as put forward by Charles Hartshorne, Alfred North Whitehead's most prominent disciple. In the last 50 years, we say absolute relative, therefore God must be absolute. Black, white, therefore God must be one or the other. Male, female, therefore God must be one or the other. And we, active or passive, cause or effect. And we break the world down into two binary categories, and then we ascribe all of these ones to God and none of these other ones. So you end up with a white, male, autocratic, powerful, invulnerable deity. The problem is relativity as another principle beyond being absolute is required for love. There is no love, especially no intimate love, without the other person affecting you in some capacity. At best, you're an automaton or a robot. Therefore, a supreme deity would have to be both supremely absolute and supremely relative, because things like empathy and compassion depend on a certain degree of relativity. And if you start to postulate that God has no relativity, all of a sudden you have a compassionless deity, a feelingless deity, an empathyless deity, and you start to have a monster for a deity. And then people who conceive of God that way can do monstrous things in the name of religion. And they can become incredibly cruel and hard-hearted towards other people because they think of God as being merely just without being merciful. But to be able to hold those ideas in tension without just contradicting yourself requires work. Requires effort. To really honor both things and hold them in tension. To really manage those polarities. Like in a good business where you're constantly innovating. So you have a decentralized structure that fosters innovation. And at the same time, you have a centralized structure which enables you to manufacture things with a certain degree of quality. And you have to use both those principles of decentralization and centralization. And they have to be expertly incorporated into your business, even though they're opposite principles. And so Krishna was breaking things. And his mother caught him. And then she wanted to punish him so he wouldn't get in trouble again because he was just too wild. And so she got a rope and she tied him up. Which sounds abusive by today's standards. I even feel weird when I say it. But I was tied up as a child by my babysitter. And it was like a loving exchange. And my parents came home and they found me tied up by my babysitter. And they tipped the babysitter. Who I was like a lovely babysitter. A girl from down the street from us. She used to babysit. Her name was Holly Friel. And so she lives in Italy now. We're great friends. And so she tied me up, me and my brother, because we were just ridiculously nonsense. And then my parents came home and they didn't call the cops or anything like that. They just thought it was hilarious. And then they untied us and gave her a nice tip and apologized for us being such naughty boys that she had to tie us up. And life went on. So anyway, Krishna's mother got a rope to tie him up, but she couldn't tie him up. Now, Krishna's a little tiny baby, but she got all the rope she could find, all the rope in the neighborhood, and she couldn't tie Krishna. She couldn't make the rope into a knot. The rope was just a little bit too short, 2 fingers too short. And our theologians make a big point. Those two fingers are our effort and Krishna's mercy working in synergy. Grace and effort. A synergistic world where we count and God's grace also is essential. And Yashoda's hair became untied, the flowers fell out of her hair, she was perspiring, her sari was coming loose, and she was distressed because she loved her child so much and she was afraid for Krishna's well-being. One time she heard that Krishna was eating dirt, and so she looked in Krishna's mouth and she saw the universe in Krishna's mouth. Then she saw herself in the universe in Krishna's mouth, looking in Krishna's mouth. There's that artistic thing where you see a person looking in a mirror, looking in a mirror, looking in a mirror, looking in a mirror. There's a name for it. I can't remember what the name is. Anybody remember the name of it? So it was a version of that thousands of years ago in our tradition. And so we still keep the idea that Krishna is the source of the cosmos, which you'll see in a minute. But Yashoda couldn't tie the belly around his waist, but then Krishna saw her struggling so much and how much she loved him, and then he agreed to let himself be tied up. And then our theologians love that. That person who binds everything, that person who's the glue that holds the universe together, that person who is beyond everything which exists was bound by the rope of love. We love that. And therefore Krishna is known as Damodar. The Lord who's so great that he can be bound by love. That's an attribute, not a deficiency. It's a beautiful quality of divinity. It's an essential quality of divinity, not a deficiency. And so then Krishna was now bound, and Yashoda went back in the house to clean up, and then Krishna began crawling. He was bound up to this ulukala, this huge grinding mortar where you would attach bullocks, and they would walk around in a circle, and you would grind grains. Not a small mortar and pestle, but a big grinding mortar, like you see in rural India. And then the bulls walk around in a circle tied with ropes. You've seen this, right? And they grind the wheat, or whatever it is there's other stuff you can grind too, but they grind wheat. And so Krishna then began crawling, and because Krishna is omnipotent, he began dragging this multi-ton device behind him. And he dragged it in between two trees. And those two trees were Managriva and Nalakuvara, who were two sons of Kuvera, the richest person in the world. And they had offended a great sage, so they became cursed to become trees. And they were cursed, but they were also blessed that Krishna will liberate you. And so they were living as trees, and Krishna walked between them and pulled the two trees down, and the two demigods came out and began offering beautiful prayers. And we have pictures of this, we have paintings of this. It's a kind of favored theme of our artists again, that these two demigods standing in the place of trees and offering prayers to Krishna. And so the amazing trope is that Krishna is bound by love, and when you bind Krishna with love, you become liberated. By binding with Krishna with love, he will then liberate you. In a bound state, Krishna gives liberation. You get it? When he's bound by love, then he liberates you and frees you from your bondage to this world. You see it? A beautiful idea, right? Really cool, poetic idea. And that's the Lila. That's the story. And this month is named after this story. And this month is the most important of our 4 months. And our whole year is governed around this month and the introspection and the efforts we make. And so I want to tell this story at least once. I've been going through the prayers. I want to tell the story at least once. And now we can read the last 2 of 8 prayers that we've been going through that we'll be singing tonight. Kuver Atma Jao. That ow is 2. So Kuver Atma Jao. Those 2 people born of Kuvera. Kuverat Majal. So Kuvera's two sons, Managriva and Nalakuvara. These two personalities. Kuverat Majal, Badha Murtya. By you in your form that was bound. By you in your bound form. So now Krishna's become bound. You follow? Yadva, just as Tvaya Mochito Bhakti Bajao. Bajao. Not Bajao. Bajao. Kritaucha. Just as the two sons of Kuvera, Tvaya, by you, Mochito, you liberated the two of them. Bhakti Bajao Kritau, and you made them experience bhakti. You made them partake in bhakti. You gave them bhakti. You allowed them to experience bhakti. Just as that happened, just as when you were bound, you liberated those people, and not only did you liberate them, but you gave them bhakti. Tata, in that same way, prema bhaktim swakam, your own love. I want the love for you. Prem bhakti swakam me prayacha. Give me your, grant me the boon of being able to love you. You gave them the ability to love you. You didn't merely liberate them. I want you to give me bhakti. Na mokshe grahome asti damodareha. And in this desire, Damodar, I have no aspiration, no attachment to getting liberation. Because he gave them two. He gave them liberation and bhakti. And the author is saying, I only want the bhakti. I only want the love. I don't want the liberation. There's not that you gave them two things. You liberated them and gave them bhakti. I don't care if I'm liberated. Let me come back again and again. Let me be born again and again. Let me not go back to the spiritual world. Or let me not go to Vaikuntha. Let me stay here in Vrindavan where I'm making this prayer. Or let me stay in this world and take birth again as long as I have love for you. And so the author is making a very high prayer where he's saying, I don't even want liberation. I know you can give that. I don't want that. I just want bhakti. The Sanatana Goswami mentioned that you can also think of na mokshe graho me is that don't think that I won't liberate you from the grinding mortar. That Krishna might be thinking, well, I'm tied up. You're asking me for all these things, but I'm tied up right now. What am I supposed to do? And so then Satyavrat Muni is saying, no, I will also. Like, don't doubt it that I will also liberate you from the grinding mortar. You fulfill my you fulfill my desire and give me prem bhakti, and then I'll untie you, and you can go about your way. Do you follow this? With graha being for the rope. And so moksha graha, I'll liberate you from the rope. No, don't doubt that I will liberate you from the rope. That's how it could be interpreted. So he's praying and he's reminding us of the story. He's reminding Krishna of the story. And he's saying, I know what you did when you were bound with the ropes of love. You freed others and you gave them love. I want that love. I don't care if you free me. And then he finishes the prayer. Namaste stu damne spuradipti dhamne. Namaste, obeisances. Namaste, obeisances to you. Namaste astu. Let there be obeisance to you. Astu is means let there be. Namaste stu damne. Let there be obeisance to the rope. Spuradipti dhamne. The abode of blazing light. Again, the rope is also made out of consciousness. So like I mentioned, everything in the spiritual world is conscious. The rope is also conscious. So that rope is the abode of blazing light. And there's an alliteration where damne is to the rope and dhamne is to the abode. And so it's a repetition of the same syllable, which is clever. Like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. It's like that, but in our religious poetry, they still do alliteration. And then, Namaste Stu Damne Sporadipti Damne. Namo, what is it? Namaste Stu Damne Sporadipti Damne. Tvadiya Udarayata Vishvasya Damne. And now, also obeisances to your belly, udara, your abdomen. I think abdomen probably comes from udara as well. I have to look it up. I know udder does. I think abdomen probably does as well. Tvadiya udarayata vishvasya damne. Obeisances to your belly, which is the abode of the cosmos. Remember how Yashoda looked in Krishna's mouth and saw the universe? And so he's saying, I am offering my obeisance to your belly, and your belly is the abode of the entire universe. Making it clear again that he's not forgetting that Krishna is God. And these miraculous pastimes, he's juxtapositioning the lovable qualities with the transcendental qualities in a very, very careful way. Namo Radhikaya Tvadiya Priyayai. My obeisance unto Radhika, who is your beloved. Namo Ananta Lilaya Devaya Tubhyam. And my obeisance to you, Krishna, who are the Lord of unlimited pastimes. I'm telling you one pastime, but you're actually the Lord of unlimited pastimes. And so what happens is there's an evolution. First he talks about Krishna's form. Then he talks about, within Krishna's form, Krishna's face. Then he prays for a vision of Krishna one time. And then unsatiated by that, he prays for a constant, eternal vision of Krishna performing pastimes, not a static vision of just Krishna. So Krishna's form as Bal Gopal, into Krishna's Mukha Amboja, his lotus-like face. Snigdha Raktais Chagopya Vrittam, with encircled by locks of curling hair. Then Edyakshi Drisha, let me see you one time. And then let me participate in the Lila. Let me join you forever and be able to interact with you forever. And so Satyabrat is taking us through. Radharani winds up in the mix. Krishna's Vrindavan, Lila winds up in the mix. He kind of takes us from the beginning to the middle to the end. And he starts out with Namam Ishwaram. I'm praying to Ishwar, the Lord. But again, that name isn't as sweet for us as the name Damodar. And so he finishes by calling Krishna Damodar. That's it. We're all done. Thank you for your kind attention. Let's do a little kirtan. Hare Krishna.